So I mentioned I was an insurance underwriter. I had a friend who was in marketing, and because of some company changes, she found herself marketing herself and the products and services of the insurance company to independent insurance agents, and through the changeover in corporate structure, she found herself marketing the tools of claims to independent claims adjusters. So she's talking to independent agents who are selling the products and then adjusters who are adjusting the products. And she had two bosses. One boss was her marketing manager that wanted her to increase sales and to get more product into the door. The other one was a claims manager who wanted her to use more outside claims agents. And both of them required about 80% of her time. When I read about you cannot serve two masters, she could not serve her two bosses. She couldn't do it. The structure, the corporate structure was wrong. And she had to choose one or the other. She chose the sales avenue to get more business in, by the way. But it was difficult for her to make that decision. And Jesus is highlighting for us a clear distinction between serving wealth and serving God. And that you cannot serve both at the same time. You will end up despising one and loving the other. So this week I had the pleasure of meeting Father Ted Johnson. I went over and I met with Mary O'Brien, and she introduced me to Father Ted Johnson. Now, does anybody know Father Ted Johnson? Yeah, excellent. Good. A few people do. Wonderful man. Father Ted Johnson was the first priest of the Episcopal mission in San Marcos. He had a vision with the bishop at the time to create an Episcopal church in San Marcos. And he was the priest in charge before the name Grace existed and before we even had a location to go to. And Father Johnson told me stories about the origin of the church. And did you know that our name was almost St. Timothy's? Instead of Grace, we almost became St. Timothy. So that's interesting. And he had profiles of the saints and what all that means, but they decided that it's the grace of God that we're here, and by the grace of God we go. And so we are thus named Grace Episcopal Church. It was wonderful meeting him, and I hope to bring him in and talk more about this. It would be great to have him back here. So, Father Ted Johnson. Wouldn't that be nice? Yes. Okay, good. I'm glad you agree. So when I was meeting with Father Johnson, he was telling me stories about the church. Now, he's in construction by trade, and so he was the perfect priest to set up this vision of bringing this old historic church that was abandoned somewhere else in San Marcos, and to bring it here to the land that the Episcopal Diocese owned. And he was the perfect priest to do this, because he understood how everything works, how this stuff gets put together, and he was a priest. So he shared with me some stories. And the first one I want to share with you is this guy named Joe. And Joe wasn't much into reading the Bible or theology, but he could paint. And boy, could he paint. That was his trade. That's what he did. He was a painter. And so his offering to the church was to paint the outside and inside of the church when it was finally assembled. And when it was assembled, they used different colored boards and all sorts of stuff to get the church to fit together. And then Joe went out with the scaffolding, and day after day brought out the paint and painted this place white. And then came inside when the finished work was done in here and painted it all white. Joe made that beautiful contribution. There was a woman named Sally. And she had retired. She wasn't good with her hands. She couldn't lift a hammer and do that type of stuff. That wasn't her skill. But she noticed that we had a bare piece of land, and that somehow we needed to get cars onto the land in a parking lot. So she gave $27,000 for the church to grade and to make our driveway and to put in our parking lots. That was her contribution. She couldn't hold a shovel and go out and do it herself, but she gave $27,000 in 1984 terms, by the way, to create the parking lot that we all drove in on this morning and parked. The children of this generation would say that those two, Joe and Sally, are wasting their time and their money. They would say that Joe should be out painting something and earning a living. By the amount of time that Joe spent painting this church, he could have been trading that for someone to pay him to do it. Likewise, Sally could have taken $27,000, put it into some sort of fund, earned 3%, 5% on it. And if you can imagine from 84 till now, how much of a nest egg she would have to retire. The world would say that was a foolish choice. Jesus would beg to differ. I think Jesus would use them in his parable to show people serving God and not wealth. Joe decided to serve God by giving his talents and his expertise and of himself to paint the church. Sally decided to give of herself with some of the financial rewards that she had received, so the church could have a parking lot so that untold generations could park here and come in and worship at Grace. They chose to serve God. Jesus gives us a clear choice. He tells us that there are things you can choose to do, but you cannot do both. You cannot reach your hand into the bag and pull out both a red and a white golf ball. You must choose one. The bag that Jesus uses, however, is clear. We can see through it. We can see what our choice is when we reach our hand in to grab. I'm going to point you to your bulletin. On page 2 is our collect of the day. It's our opening prayer. It's a collect in various forms that was used around the globe today in the Anglican Church. And at the end, the last sentence. Be with us now in our ever-changing lives to focus on things not perishable, but on things eternal. An ancient prayer that's been said in the church over and over again. And I invite you today to evaluate your choices. I ask you to focus on those things that are not perishable. Rather, focus your lives on things that are eternal. And when you do, focus on things that are love. Focus on things that God tells us that will not leave, like His love for us and His kingdom. Today we're going to sing, They'll Know That We Are Christians. We're going to sing that during our communion hymn. They will know we are Christians not because of our wealth. That's not how the song goes. And they'll know we are Christians because we're wealthy, because we've got lots of money. No. They'll know we're Christians because of our love. I ask you to hold on to things that are eternal. Hold on to love. And focus your lives that way. When you do, may the peace of God be with you and the grace of Jesus Christ. Amen.